My husband suggested, let's open a joint bank account. It will be more convenient for us. I agreed and transferred all my savings there. A month later, he filed for divorce and emptied our account to zero. But he didn't know that I managed to... Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I had spent 42 years building a life I was proud of. My name is Margaret Hartwell, and at 67 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I had raised 3 children, buried my first husband after a long illness, and worked as a school librarian for decades until retirement. My modest savings, $127,000, represented every extra shift, every careful budget, every sacrifice. It was my security blanket, my independence. Then I met Richard at a community center dance class. He was 70, charming, with silver hair and a warm smile that made me feel young again. We dated for 18 months before marrying in a small ceremony. My children were supportive but cautious. "Mom, just keep your finances separate," my daughter Linda had warned. I had laughed it off. Richard seemed genuinely kind, attentive, always bringing me flowers and cooking elaborate Sunday dinners. But looking back now, I could see the signs I had missed. It started small. 3 months into our marriage, Richard began commenting on my outdated banking habits. "Sweetheart, why do you still write checks? It's so inefficient," he'd say, shaking his head with that patronizing smile. Then came the suggestions about consolidating bills. "We're married now, Maggie. Shouldn't we simplify our finances?" I resisted at first. Something in my gut whispered caution, but Richard was persistent, always framing it as a matter of convenience, of trust, of being a real married couple. "My ex-wife and I always had joint accounts," he'd mention casually. "It just makes everything easier. Don't you trust me?" That word, trust. He weaponized it beautifully. One Tuesday evening in March, as we sat in our small living room, Richard brought it up again. "Maggie, I've been thinking. Let's open a joint account at the bank. We can pool our resources, pay bills from one place. It'll be so much more convenient for us both." I hesitated, my fingers tightening around my coffee mug. "I don't know, Richard. I've always managed my own money." "Of course you have. And you've done wonderfully," he interrupted smoothly, reaching over to pat my hand. "But we're a team now. This is what married couples do. Besides, what if something happens to one of us? We need access to funds immediately. It's just practical, honey." His reasoning seemed sound, and I was tired of being painted as the suspicious, untrusting wife. Against every instinct screaming inside me, I agreed. "Wonderful," Richard beamed, pulling me into a hug. "I'll set it up tomorrow. You'll see how much easier this makes everything." We opened the joint account the following week. Richard suggested I transfer most of my savings there, just to get started, make it worthwhile. In a moment of weakness, wanting to prove my commitment to our marriage, I transferred $115,000. I kept $12,000 in my old personal account, though even that felt like a declaration of distrust. For 3 weeks, everything seemed normal. Richard was especially affectionate, more attentive than ever. He'd check the account balance daily, showing me how our money was growing with interest. "See, isn't this better?" he'd say. But then I noticed something odd. Richard had started receiving calls he'd take outside. "Work stuff," he'd explain, though he'd been retired from his contracting business for 2 years. He spent more time on his computer, angling the screen away when I walked past. When I asked about his daughter from his first marriage, someone he'd mentioned but I'd never met, he became evasive. "We're not close," was all he'd say. One morning in late April, I woke to find Richard already dressed in a suit, packing a small suitcase. Where are you going? I asked, confused. He didn't look at me. Margaret, we need to talk. I'm not happy in this marriage. I've contacted a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. The room spun. What? Richard, what are you talking about? If something's wrong, we can work. There's nothing to work on, he said coldly, his warm demeanor completely gone. It was like looking at a stranger. I'll be in touch through my attorney. He walked out. Just like that. 42 years of careful living, and I'd been reduced to a cliché, the foolish old woman who trusted the wrong man. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and logged into our joint bank account. Balance. $0. He had withdrawn everything, every single dollar. My life savings. Gone. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at that zero, feeling the world collapse around me. How could I have been so stupid? But then, as the initial shock began to fade, something else flickered to life inside me. Rage, cold, calculating rage. Richard didn't know everything. He thought he'd won. But there was something I had done, something he didn't know about, and that would change everything. For the first hour, I simply sat there, paralyzed. The number on the screen seemed to mock me. $0. A lifetime of work erased in a single transaction. I thought about calling Linda, but shame burned in my throat. She had warned me. They had all warned me. I finally forced myself to stand, to move, to think. I made tea with trembling hands, the ritual giving me something to focus on. As I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Richard had convinced me to trust him, I began to take inventory of my situation. My personal account, $12,000. Enough for a few months maybe, if I was careful. My Social Security covered basic living expenses. The house was mine, bought years ago with my first husband. At least Richard couldn't take that. We'd been married less than a year, and I'd owned it for 30. But $115,000. God. That was supposed to be my cushion, my medical emergency fund, my ability to help my grandchildren with college, my independence. I pulled out a notepad and began writing down everything I knew. Richard's full name, the bank account number, the date I'd transferred the money, the date he'd withdrawn it, his lawyer's name, if he'd even really hired one yet, or if that was just another lie. As I wrote, my mind kept circling back to one thing, one small thing Richard didn't know about. 3 days after we'd opened the joint account, something had bothered me enough that I couldn't sleep. It was 2 a.m. when I'd crept out of bed, careful not to wake Richard, and driven to the 24-hour Kinko's across town. There, I'd printed out every single statement from the joint account, every transaction, every detail. I'd also printed the original transfer documents showing my $115,000 deposit. Then I'd made copies, 3 sets, and stored them in different locations. One in a safety deposit box at a different bank, one with my daughter Linda, and one in a locked box in my garage, hidden inside an old paint can. Why had I done it? At the time, I'd told myself it was just being practical, keeping records. But deep down, some part of me must have known. Some instinct had screamed that I needed proof of what was mine. Now that proof might be my lifeline. I picked up my phone and called my daughter. "Mom, it's 7 a.m. Is everything? Linda, I need your help." My voice cracked, and then the whole story spilled out. The joint account, the transfer, Richard leaving, the empty balance. There was a long silence. I braced myself for, "I told you so." But instead, Linda's voice came back, sharp and focused. "Mom, listen to me. Do not panic. We're going to fix this. First, do you have any documentation?" "Yes," I said, relief flooding through me. I have copies of everything. The transfer, the statements, all of it. Good. That's good, Mom. Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to call a lawyer today. Not tomorrow, today. I'm going to text you the name of a family law attorney who helped my friend Sarah. Her name is Patricia Moreno, and she's tough. You call her office the second it opens. But Linda, lawyers are expensive, and I only have… Mom. Linda's voice was firm. This is what that remaining $12,000 is for. You're going to fight this. You understand me? You're going to fight, and you're going to win. Richard committed financial fraud. This wasn't a gift. You transferred that money into a joint marital account with the understanding you'd both manage it. He cleaned it out before filing for divorce. That's illegal. Could it be? Hope, dangerous and fragile, began to bloom in my chest. Do you really think I have a case? I whispered. Mom, I know you do. But you need to act fast. The money trail is fresh. Get Patricia on this immediately. After we hung up, I sat there, feeling something shift inside me. The victim mentality began to crack, revealing something harder underneath. Richard had counted on me being too embarrassed, too ashamed, too old to fight back. He'd counted on me accepting this as my lot, slinking away in defeat. He'd miscalculated. At 9:01 a.m., I called Patricia Moreno's office. By 2 p.m. that same day, I was sitting across from her in a bright office downtown, my folder of documents spread across her desk. Patricia was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. She reviewed my papers in silence, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Hartwell, when exactly did you print these statements? 3 days after opening the account, I admitted. I had a feeling something wasn't right. A slow smile spread across Patricia's face. You beautiful, brilliant woman. Do you know what you've handed me? A paper trail, documented proof that this was your money, transferred into a joint account. And he withdrew it unilaterally, then immediately filed for divorce. This isn't just grounds for a lawsuit, Mrs. Hartwell. This could potentially be criminal fraud. My heart hammered. So I can get my money back? We're going to try for every penny plus damages for emotional distress. But I need you to understand. This is going to be a fight. Your husband is going to claim the money was a gift. That joint accounts mean shared assets. We'll need to prove intent to defraud. I'm ready to fight, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. What do we do first? Patricia opened her laptop. First, we file an emergency motion to freeze any remaining assets and trace where your money went. Second, we formally respond to the divorce filing. And third, she looked at me seriously, we prepare for him to fight dirty. Men like this don't steal 6 figures without having a plan. He'll have a plan, I said quietly. But so do I now. Patricia moved quickly. Within 48 hours, we'd filed an emergency motion in family court requesting a temporary restraining order on the joint account, though it was already empty, and demanding a full accounting of where the funds had gone. More importantly, we'd filed a formal response to Richard's divorce petition, contesting his claims and alleging financial fraud. The papers were served to Richard at his new address, an apartment I hadn't even known he'd rented. According to the process server, Richard had gone pale when he'd read the documents. Good. Let him sweat. 3 days later, Patricia called me. Margaret, we got something. Richard's attorney filed their response and they made a mistake. They're claiming the money was a marital asset that he had every right to withdraw. But they also provided a bank statement showing where the money went. Where? I gripped the phone tighter. He transferred $80,000 to an account in someone else's name. A woman named Diane Coulter. Mean anything to you? My blood ran cold. He told me he had a daughter from his first marriage he wasn't close to. He never mentioned her name, but— "It's not his daughter," Patricia interrupted. I had my paralegal do some digging. Diane Coulter is 53 years old, never married, and has been linked to Richard in property records. They co-own a rental property in Florida, purchased 8 months ago. 8 months ago? 2 months before Richard married me. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This had been planned from the beginning. The courtship, the charm, the marriage, all of it a carefully orchestrated con. And Diane was his partner, waiting in the wings for her share of my money. "He's done this before, hasn't he?" I asked quietly. Patricia's silence was answer enough. Then, "I'm looking into it. But Margaret, this is actually good news for us. This proves the money wasn't used for legitimate marital purposes. He immediately transferred it to a third party he had a prior financial relationship with. That's evidence of intent to defraud. We can use this." I felt a strange calm settle over me. The shock was gone, replaced by clarity. "What's our next move?" "I'm filing an expanded motion. We're going after the money in Diane Coulter's account, and we're requesting a deposition. I want both of them under oath, explaining this transaction. How do you feel about that?" "I want them to squirm," I said coldly. "That's what I like to hear." That evening, Linda came over with dinner. We sat in my kitchen, and I told her everything Patricia had discovered. "Mom, this is insane," Linda said, shaking her head. "He actually had a partner? This was a planned theft?" "It looks that way." "What kind of person does this?" But even as she asked, I could see the anger in her eyes. My children had always been protective, but now Linda looked ready for war. "What do you need from me?" "Just be here," I said. "I feel like I'm going crazy sometimes, questioning if I imagined all the good times, all the moments I thought were real." Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't imagine anything. He's a con artist, Mom. He's good at what he does. But he picked the wrong woman this time." The following week, Patricia called with news that made my hands shake. We got the deposition date. 2 weeks from now, both Richard and Diane Coulter will be questioned under oath. But Margaret, there's something else. My investigator found another woman, Richard's second wife, Helen Pritchard. She's willing to talk to us. "Another wife?" The room tilted. "She divorced him 5 years ago. Similar story. Whirlwind romance, pressure to combine finances, sudden divorce. She didn't pursue legal action because she was too devastated and thought she had no proof. But when my investigator contacted her, she was very interested in sharing what she knows. That Saturday, I met Helen Pritchard at a coffee shop downtown. She was around my age, with kind eyes that held a deep sadness. We sat in a corner booth, 2 women connected by the same predator. "He told me I was the love of his life," Helen said softly, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "We were married for 11 months. He convinced me to add him to my investment accounts, said it was for estate planning purposes. Then one day, he was gone, and so was $93,000. I felt sick." "You didn't try to get it back?" "I was too ashamed. Too broken. And I didn't have proof like you do. He'd been so careful, making it look like I'd given him permission for everything." She looked up at me. "But I kept records. Every conversation I could remember, I wrote down afterward. Emails. Text messages. I have boxes of it all, documenting the same pattern of manipulation. Would you be willing to share that with my attorney?" Helen's jaw set. "I'd be willing to testify. If your lawyer thinks it'll help, I want to see him finally face consequences. He's probably done this to others. Maybe if we stop him now, we save the next woman." I reached across and took her hand. "Thank you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Richard's face, that charming smile, the way he'd made me feel cherished. All of it had been a lie, a performance. And Diane had been there all along, waiting for her cut. But they'd made a critical mistake. They'd assumed I'd be too ashamed, too defeated to fight back. They were about to learn differently. Patricia called the next morning with an edge of excitement in her voice. "Margaret, Helen's documentation is gold. We have a pattern of behavior, a clear modus operandi. I'm amending our lawsuit to include racketeering claims. If we can prove this was a systematic scheme, we're not just talking about getting your money back. We're talking about punitive damages. We're talking about potential criminal charges." "How sure are you?" I asked. "With what we have now, 70%. But at the deposition, if they slip up, if they contradict each other—" She paused. "I think we can bury them, Margaret. I really do." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Patricia's law firm. I dressed carefully that day, a navy blue suit, simple pearls, my gray hair neatly styled. I wanted to look composed, dignified. Everything Richard had assumed I wasn't strong enough to be. Patricia had prepared me extensively. "They're going to try to rattle you," she'd warned. "Richard's attorney will paint you as a bitter ex-wife making false accusations. Stay calm. Stick to facts. Don't let emotion take over." Richard arrived with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in his 50s, named Donald Pierce. Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable for once. Diane Coulter came separately, accompanied by her own attorney. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 50s, with blonde hair and too much makeup. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, annoyance. The deposition lasted 4 grueling hours. I watched as Patricia methodically dismantled their stories. She presented the bank statements, the transfer records, the timeline. She questioned Richard about when he'd rented his apartment, 3 weeks before suggesting the joint account. About his relationship with Diane. They stumbled, claiming they were business associates. About the Florida property. "Mr. Hartwell, can you explain why, within 24 hours of withdrawing $115,000 from your joint account with your wife, you transferred $80,000 to Ms. Coulter's personal account?" Richard's lawyer objected, but Richard answered anyway. "It was a business investment. Diane and I co-own properties. This was for renovations." "Renovations that required cash within hours of you filing for divorce? The timing was coincidental." Patricia smiled. "Coincidental, I see. And Mrs. Hartwell, did your husband ever discuss this business investment with you before withdrawing your life savings?" "Never," I said clearly. "He never mentioned any business with Diane. He told me he was fully retired." When it was Diane's turn, she was defensive, almost hostile. Patricia pressed her on the Florida property, the rental income, the nature of her relationship with Richard. "How long have you and Mr. Hartwell been romantically involved?" "We're not," Diane started. "Ms. Coulter, you're under oath." Diane's attorney objected, but the damage was done. She'd hesitated too long. The truth hung in the air like smoke. As we broke for lunch, Richard's lawyer cornered Patricia in the hallway. I watched from a distance as they had a heated conversation. When Patricia returned, her expression was grim. "They want to settle," she said. My heart leaped. "For how much? 50,000, less than half what they'd stolen." Rage flared in my chest. "No." I told them that would be your answer. "They're scared, Margaret. That's why they're offering anything at all. But I want you to know, if we reject this and go to trial, it could take months, maybe a year. And there's always risk." "I'm not taking $50,000 like some kind of consolation prize," I said firmly. "We have them. You said so yourself. I want everything back, plus damages. I want them to face consequences." Patricia nodded approvingly. Then we proceed. But be prepared. They're going to get nasty now. She was right. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Margaret, Richard's voice, no longer charming, cold. You need to stop this circus. You stole from me. We had a joint account. That money was as much mine as yours. You're embarrassing yourself, dragging this through court. Just accept the settlement and move on with your life. The settlement that's less than half what you stole? No. His voice hardened. You don't want to push this. You have no idea what you're getting into. Diane has connections. We can make things very difficult for you. Your daughter Linda, she works at that marketing firm downtown, right? Be a shame if rumors started circulating about her mother's stability, her judgment. My blood turned to ice. Are you threatening my daughter? I'm offering friendly advice. Drop the lawsuit. Take the $50,000. Or things are going to get uncomfortable for you and your family. I hung up, my hands shaking. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was fury. I immediately called Patricia and relayed the conversation. Did you record it? She asked. No, I didn't think. It's okay. But from now on, any call from Richard, Diane, or their attorneys goes directly to me. And, Margaret, this threat, it tells me they're desperate. We're close to breaking them. The next day, the pressure intensified. I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside were printed screenshots from my social media, photos of my grandchildren, information about where Linda worked, where my son Michael lived, a note in block letters. Back off or your family pays the price. I showed Patricia everything. She immediately filed a motion for a restraining order and reported the threats to the police. But the damage was done. I felt violated, vulnerable. They'd gone after my family. Linda wanted to hire security. Michael demanded I drop the case. Mom, it's not worth it if these people are dangerous, he argued, but I refused to back down. If I let them win through intimidation, what does that teach your children? That bullies always get their way? No, I'm seeing this through. Still, the stress was taking its toll. I wasn't sleeping. I'd lost weight. Every unknown car on my street made me anxious. Patricia noticed during our next meeting. Margaret, I need you to take a few days. Step back. Rest. Let me handle the legal maneuvering. You're no good to this case if you collapse. She was right. I spent the next 3 days at Linda's house, playing with my grandchildren, trying to remember what normal felt like. The simple act of reading bedtime stories, of baking cookies, of not checking my phone every 5 minutes. It was healing. By the weekend, I felt steadier, stronger. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something else. Determination. Resolve. Richard and Diane had shown their hand. They were scared, desperate, dangerous. Good. Cornered animals make mistakes. I returned to my own home on Monday morning, feeling more centered than I had in weeks. Patricia had texted me an update. The restraining order had been granted. Richard and Diane were legally prohibited from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my property. But that didn't stop them from trying different tactics. On Tuesday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I checked through the peephole and saw a well-dressed woman I didn't recognize holding a folder. Wary, I opened the door with the chain still attached. Mrs. Hartwell? My name is Jennifer Strauss. I'm a family counselor, and I was hoping to speak with you about a very sensitive matter. I didn't hire a counselor. No, but Mr. Hartwell did. He's very concerned about your well-being, Margaret. May I call you Margaret? Her smile was practiced, professional. He believes this legal dispute has put tremendous strain on you, and he'd like to suggest mediation, a chance to resolve things peacefully, without the courts. I almost laughed. They were trying to manipulate me through fake concern. I have an attorney. All communication goes through her. Of course, but sometimes attorneys can escalate situations. Richard genuinely wants to make amends. He's authorized me to offer you $75,000. Right now, today. All you have to do is sign an agreement dropping the lawsuit. $75,000. They'd gone up $25,000 in less than a week, which meant they were getting more desperate. Ms. Strauss, I'm going to say this once clearly. I'm not interested in mediation. I'm not interested in settlements that return a fraction of what was stolen from me, and I'm certainly not interested in anything Richard Hartwell has to offer. Please leave my property. Her professional mask slipped for just a moment, showing irritation underneath. You're making a mistake, Margaret. The courts are unpredictable. You could end up with nothing. That's my risk to take. Goodbye. I closed the door and immediately called Patricia to report the attempted contact. She was furious. They violated the restraining order by proxy. I'm documenting this. They're digging themselves deeper. That evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "A final offer." Against my better judgment, I opened it. Margaret, this has gone too far. I never wanted to hurt you. What we had was real, at least in the beginning. But you have to understand. I needed that money. I have debts you don't know about. Diane and I are just trying to survive. I'm begging you, please accept the $75,000 settlement. It's more than fair. If you keep pushing this, we'll be forced to expose things about you. Your past struggles with depression after your first husband died, the time you were briefly hospitalized. We'll paint you as an unstable woman who made poor financial decisions and is now trying to blame others. Don't make us destroy your reputation. Take the money. Move on. Richard, I read it twice, feeling something icy settle in my chest. So now it was blackmail. They'd weaponize my grief, my vulnerability after losing my first husband, my very human reaction to tragedy. But instead of fear, I felt nothing. Cold, absolute nothing. I forwarded the email to Patricia without comment. She called within minutes. Margaret, this is perfect. This is documented blackmail and admission of financial desperation. He literally wrote, I needed that money, implying it wasn't his to take, and threatening to defame you in court. Their attorney is going to have a heart attack when they find out Richard sent this. I'm not afraid of them anymore, I said quietly. Let them try to paint me as unstable. I have 3 children who'll testify to my sound mind. I have decades of employment records, medical records showing I sought appropriate grief counseling. Nothing more. Their threats are empty. That's exactly right. And Margaret? I think you should know. Helen Pritchard isn't the only one coming forward. My investigator found a 3rd woman. Richard was engaged to her 4 years ago, before Helen. She broke it off when she caught him stealing money from her purse. She's willing to testify about his pattern of targeting vulnerable women. A pattern, not a one-time mistake, not a desperate act, a calculated, repeated scheme. How many women has he done this to? I wondered aloud. We may never know the full number, Patricia admitted. But we're building an undeniable case. They know it, which is why they're panicking. That weekend, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my neighbor, Dorothy, an elegant woman in her 70s who I'd had coffee with occasionally. Margaret, dear, I heard through the grapevine what you're going through. I wanted you to know you're not alone. Something similar happened to my sister 15 years ago. If you need someone to talk to, someone who understands, I'm here. The next day, Linda organized a small gathering at my house. My children, their spouses, my grandchildren. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We just existed together, made dinner, laughed, reminded me that I had people who loved me unconditionally. My son Michael, who'd initially wanted me to drop the case, pulled me aside. Mom, I was wrong. You should fight this. Not just for the money, for yourself. To prove you're not someone who can be pushed around. I'm scared sometimes, I admitted. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. But you're also the strongest person I know. That evening, after everyone had left, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace, not happiness. The situation was still messy, still unresolved. But peace. Certainty that I was doing the right thing. Richard and Diane were watching, waiting for me to crack. I could feel it. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in my favorite chair, and reviewed the case files Patricia had sent me. Facts, evidence, timeline. Everything pointed to fraud. Everything pointed to conviction. They'd offered $75,000, then tried manipulation and blackmail when that failed, which meant they were out of moves. Now they'd retreat, regroup, try to figure out their next strategy. Let them. I had something they didn't. Patience, truth, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a message. Margaret's attorney calling on behalf of Richard and Diane. They wanted to discuss reasonable terms. I deleted it without listening to the rest. There would be no more negotiations, no more compromises. This was going to trial, and I was going to win. 3 weeks before the trial date, Richard showed up at my door. I saw him through the peephole standing on my porch in the late afternoon light. He was alone, wearing a casual sweater and jeans, looking almost vulnerable. Nothing like the cold stranger who'd walked out with my money. I didn't open the door. You're violating the restraining order, Richard. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. Maggie, please, his voice cracked. Just 5 minutes. I'm not here to threaten you. I just want to talk, really talk. We used to be able to do that, remember? Despite everything, some treacherous part of me hesitated. This was the man I'd loved, or thought I'd loved. The man who'd held me when I cried about missing my first husband. The man who'd danced with me in our kitchen. You have 60 seconds before I call 911, I said through the closed door. I made a terrible mistake, he said. The worst mistake of my life. I was desperate, Maggie. I have gambling debts, serious ones. People were threatening me. I panicked. Diane convinced me this was the only way out, but she was wrong. I was wrong. Now we were getting somewhere. An admission, on my doorstep, where I'd set my phone to record audio the moment I'd seen him through the peephole. So you admit you stole my money to pay gambling debts? I admit I made a horrible decision, but it doesn't have to end this way. Come to the door, let me see your face. Let me apologize properly. We can fix this, Maggie. I'll pay everything back, I swear. We can even reconcile. I miss you. I miss us. My hand was on the doorknob before I caught myself. This was manipulation. Pure, calculated manipulation. The gambling debt story. Convenient, sympathetic, designed to make him seem like a victim too. The reconciliation talk. Playing on my loneliness, my desire to believe our marriage had meant something. Richard, you need to leave, now. His tone changed instantly. The vulnerability vanished. Don't be stupid, Margaret. You're 70 years old. You really think you're going to find someone else? You really want to spend your final years alone, bitter, fighting in courtrooms. I'm offering you a way out, a chance to save face. Be smart. I'm being smarter than I've ever been. Leave my property. You stubborn, foolish woman! He caught himself, but too late. The mask had slipped completely. Fine. Have it your way. But you're going to regret this in court. My lawyer is going to tear you apart. By the time we're done, everyone will see you for what you are. A vindictive old woman who can't accept that her marriage failed. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Through the door, I said clearly, "I'm calling the police now for violation of a restraining order. If you're still here in 2 minutes, you'll be arrested." I heard him swear, then footsteps retreating. Through the window, I watched him get into his car and speed away. My hands were shaking, but I'd gotten what I needed. A recorded admission of the gambling debts, threats, and a clear violation of the restraining order. But that wasn't the end. 2 days later, Diane showed up. She was smarter than Richard. She stayed on the sidewalk, technically not on my property, but close enough that I could hear her clearly when I opened the window. "Mrs. Hartwell, we need to talk, woman to woman." "I have nothing to say to you." "Just hear me out, please." She had a folder in her hands. "Richard is a liar and a manipulator. You know that now. But I'm a victim too. He convinced me to help him, told me you were wealthy and wouldn't miss the money. He said you'd agreed to help him with his debts." This was a new angle. Turn on Richard, present herself as another victim. "He's abusive," Diane continued, her voice quivering. "Emotionally, sometimes physically. I'm trapped in this situation just like you were. If you drop the lawsuit against me, I'll testify against him. I'll help you get your money back, all of it." It was almost convincing, almost. But I'd seen the property records. I'd seen the Florida rental income. Diane had been profiting from this scheme for years. "Ms. Coulter, I've already reported Richard's visit to my attorney and the police. I suggest you leave before I report this contact as well." Her sympathetic expression hardened. "You're making a massive mistake. You think you're going to win in court? We have attorneys who'll bury you in paperwork, drag this out for years. You'll die before you see a penny. Then I'll die fighting, better than living as a coward." "You self-righteous bitch," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Richard has friends, connections. We can make your life hell, your children's lives hell." "Are you threatening my family again, on a public street where my neighbor is recording you?" I gestured to Dorothy's house across the street, where she stood with her phone clearly pointed at Diane. Diane's face went white. She looked at Dorothy, then back at me, and I saw the exact moment she realized she'd been outplayed. "This isn't over," she said, backing toward her car. "You're right," I called after her. "It's not over. It's over when a judge says it is." After she left, Dorothy came over with her phone. "Got the whole thing," she said with satisfaction. "You want me to send it to your lawyer?" "Please." That night, alone in my house, I felt the fear trying to creep back in. They'd come to my home, both of them, in direct violation of court orders. They'd threatened my family again. They were desperate and dangerous. But then I thought about all the women Richard had done this to. Helen, who'd been too broken to fight. The unnamed woman before her. How many others? If I backed down now, he'd do it again. To some other lonely widow, some other vulnerable woman looking for companionship. The fear crystallized into something harder, colder. Resolve. I called Patricia and sent her both recordings, Richard's doorstep confession and Diane's street confrontation. She listened in silence, then said, "Margaret, they just handed us the case. Both of them violated the restraining order. Both made threats on record. Richard admitted to the gambling debts and taking your money. Diane's attempt to flip on Richard actually confirms they were working together. This is better than I could have hoped. So we're ready for trial? We're ready to annihilate them." The trial began on a gray Monday morning in late October. I dressed in a simple black dress and pearls, dignified, composed. Patricia had coached me extensively. Let the evidence speak. Stay calm. Don't let them see you rattled. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from TV shows. Richard and Diane sat on the opposite side with their attorneys, carefully not looking at each other. That separation was strategic, Patricia had explained. They'd try to claim they weren't partners, that they barely knew each other. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Catherine Morrison, called the proceedings to order. Patricia's opening statement was surgical. She laid out the timeline: Richard's courtship, the marriage, the pressure to create a joint account, the suspicious timing of his apartment rental, the withdrawal of funds, the immediate transfer to Diane, the divorce filing. She introduced Helen Pritchard's similar experience, establishing a pattern. She detailed the restraining order violations, the threats, the attempted bribery. Richard's attorney, Donald Pierce, painted a different picture. Your Honor, this is a simple case of a marriage that didn't work out and joint assets being divided. Mr. Hartwell made legitimate business decisions with money in an account he was legally entitled to access. Mrs. Hartwell's hurt feelings about the divorce don't constitute fraud. The first day was mostly testimony. Patricia called the bank manager who'd helped us open the joint account. He confirmed that I'd made the initial deposit of $115,000 from my personal account. Did Mr. Hartwell make any deposits to this joint account? Patricia asked. No, ma'am. The only funds that entered the account came from Mrs. Hartwell's personal savings. On cross-examination, Pierce tried to establish that joint accounts meant joint ownership, regardless of who deposited what. But the bank manager held firm. In cases of dispute, we examine the source of funds and the intent behind the account creation. Day 2 brought Helen Pritchard to the stand. She was nervous but steady as she recounted her experience with Richard. The parallels were devastating. The same charm offensive, the same pressure tactics, the same sudden abandonment. Did Mr. Hartwell ever pay you back? Patricia asked. No, he disappeared completely, changed his phone number. When I tried to pursue it legally, I discovered he'd moved to another state. Richard's attorney tried to discredit her. Ms. Pritchard, isn't it true you and Mr. Hartwell had a contentious divorce, that you might be here seeking revenge? I'm here seeking justice, Helen said quietly. Not for me. It's too late for me. But for Margaret and whoever might be next. The third day was mine. I took the stand with my heart pounding, but my voice steady. Patricia walked me through everything. How we met, the marriage, Richard's gradual pressure about finances, my hesitation, his manipulation of my trust. Why did you agree to the joint account if you were hesitant? Patricia asked. Because I wanted to be a good wife. Because he made me feel like my caution was a character flaw, a lack of trust. Because I loved him and wanted to believe the best of him. Then came the moment Patricia had prepared me for. She introduced the recordings, Richard's doorstep confession about gambling debts, Diane's street confrontation, and threats. The courtroom went silent as my voice played from the speakers, clear and strong. So you admit you stole my money to pay gambling debts? Richard's voice. I admit I made a horrible decision. Judge Morrison's expression didn't change, but I saw her make a note. When Pierce cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as bitter and vengeful. Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it true you're simply angry about the divorce and trying to punish Mr. Hartwell financially? No, I said calmly. I'm trying to recover money that was stolen from me through fraud and manipulation. You willingly put money in a joint account? I was coerced through psychological manipulation into trusting a man who was already planning to steal from me. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact. The apartment he rented before suggesting the joint account. The property he co-owned with Diane Coulter before we even met. The pattern of behavior with other women. These aren't opinions, Mr. Pierce. They're facts. I saw Pierce hesitate, realizing he was helping me make my case. Day 4 brought Diane to the stand. She was hostile from the start, clearly angry about being dragged into court. Patricia methodically destroyed her story. Miss Coulter, how do you know Mr. Hartwell? We're business partners. We co-own a rental property. When did you purchase this property? 2 years ago. A pause. Approximately. Patricia showed the property records. Actually, it was purchased 8 months before Mr. Hartwell married Mrs. Hartwell, wasn't it? Diane shifted uncomfortably. I don't remember the exact date. And when Mr. Hartwell transferred $80,000 to your account, what was that for? Property renovations? Do you have receipts for these renovations? Contractor invoices? Permits? Silence. Ms. Coulter, you're under oath. The renovations were delayed. Delayed for 9 months and counting? With no documentation of any kind? Patricia's voice was sharp. Or was that money actually payment for your role in a fraudulent scheme? Diane's attorney objected. But the damage was done. Diane's face had gone red, her composure cracking. Finally, Richard took the stand. Patricia treated him like a hostile witness from the start. Mr. Hartwell, when did you decide to divorce Mrs. Hartwell? When I realized we weren't compatible. When specifically? What date? He hesitated. I don't recall the exact. Was it before or after you rented the apartment at 455 Parkview Drive? I'm not sure. Patricia produced the rental agreement. You signed a 6-month lease 3 weeks before suggesting the joint account to Mrs. Hartwell. So you'd already decided to leave, hadn't you? The joint account was never about marriage. It was about theft. Richard's composure shattered. That's not. I needed. She doesn't understand. What doesn't she understand, Mr. Hartwell? The gambling debts. I was desperate. They were going to hurt me. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison called for order. Richard's attorney looked like he wanted to die. Patricia pressed. So you admit you took Mrs. Hartwell's money to pay gambling debts? Yes, but... And you never told her about these debts before marriage? No. And you planned from the beginning to take her money and leave? I didn't plan. It happened. He was floundering, contradicting himself, his story falling apart. I watched from my seat, feeling strangely calm. This was the man who'd swept me off my feet, who'd made me doubt myself. Now he was just a middle-aged con artist caught in his own web of lies. Judge Morrison called a recess. As we filed out, I caught Richard's eye. He looked defeated, broken. Good. Judge Morrison took 2 days to review the evidence before delivering her verdict. Those were the longest 48 hours of my life. Patricia was confident, but I couldn't shake the anxiety that somehow they might slip away. The courtroom was packed when we reconvened. Judge Morrison entered, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at Richard and Diane. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence in this matter. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of financial fraud and elder abuse I've encountered in 20 years on the bench. Richard went pale. Diane stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Mr. Hartwell, you engaged in a calculated, premeditated scheme to defraud Mrs. Hartwell of her life savings. You married her under false pretenses, manipulated her into creating a joint account, and immediately absconded with funds that were demonstrably hers. Your recorded admission proves intent to defraud beyond reasonable doubt. Judge Morrison turned to Diane. Ms. Coulter, you were a knowing participant in this scheme. You received stolen funds and actively helped conceal them. She looked down at her notes. Therefore, I find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. Mr. Hartwell and Miss Coulter are jointly and severally liable for the following: full restitution of $115,000 plus interest, $119,340. Emotional distress damages, $100,000. Punitive damages for elder abuse, $250,000. Attorney's fees, $47,000. Total judgment, $516,340. The courtroom erupted. I couldn't breathe. Over $500,000. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Prosecution on charges of fraud, elder abuse, and extortion. Richard's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client doesn't have the means to... Then you'll sell assets, Mr. Pierce. The Florida property will be liquidated first. I'm placing liens on all their known properties and bank accounts effective immediately. She turned to me. Mrs. Hartwell, I commend your courage. You've not only secured justice for yourself, but potentially prevented this man from victimizing others. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked, "Mrs. Hartwell, what do you want other victims to know?" I answered carefully. That you're not alone, that being trusting doesn't make you stupid, and that it's never too late to fight back. These predators count on shame and silence. Don't give them that power. The DA's office moved quickly on criminal charges. Richard and Diane were both indicted on multiple felony counts. The Florida property sold for $340,000, going directly toward the judgment. Diane took a plea deal, 3 years in prison in exchange for testifying against Richard. Her testimony was damning, exposing years of targeting vulnerable women. Richard went to trial and was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in state prison. I was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Richard looked at me and I saw no remorse, just anger that he'd finally been caught. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no pity, just cold, final closure. Within 6 months, I'd recovered $487,000 of the judgment. After legal expenses, I had more money than I'd started with, and Richard would spend his remaining years behind bars. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about saying clearly, you cannot do this to people and walk away unscathed. 6 months after the trial, I realized I was genuinely happy. The house felt like mine again, redecorated in soft blues and greens. Richard's office transformed into a cozy reading nook. I'd started the Margaret Hartwell Foundation for Financial Fraud Victims, using part of the judgment money. We'd already helped 12 women recover assets and press charges. Patricia Moreno and Helen Pritchard both worked with the foundation. Helen counseling victims, helping them overcome shame. I joined a book club, took watercolor classes, even started dating a retired teacher named George. We took it slow, and I kept my finances completely separate. Meanwhile, Richard's life crumbled. Prison was brutal. He'd been attacked twice, his health declining rapidly. At 70, serving 12 years, he'd likely die behind bars. Diane had served 3 years, but emerged to nothing. Couldn't find work, lost everything, now lived in a studio apartment working at a gas station, paying off the judgment forever. I saw her once at a grocery store, counting change, looking decades older. Our eyes met. I felt nothing, just turned away. The foundation grew, helping victims nationwide. On the verdict's anniversary, Patricia asked if I regretted fighting. Never, I said. I didn't let him win. I'd won in every way that counted. Looking back, I learned that trust isn't weakness, it's courage. But trust must be paired with vigilance. I learned that asking for help isn't shameful, it's strength. I learned that your age doesn't determine your power. If you're facing something similar, please document everything, seek legal counsel immediately, and don't let shame silence you. These predators count on your silence. What would you do in my situation? Would you fight, or would you let them win? Share your thoughts below. Subscribe if this story resonated with you. And remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story.